So good evening. My name is Jim Gilmartin. I'm the president of the ECCL. I want to thank you for participating in this public forum on water quality and our environment, which we sponsored. A little bit of news for some of you. On February 1st, we will officially change our name to Engage Estero. ECCL will go another way. We're going to build on what they did for so many years and put in so much time to get you to the community you have right now. We're just going to take it into another generation, okay? The increases in our population adds a variety of potential threats to our water supply and its quality. And the Earth's warming is believed to be causing worsening effects on our local economy, water, air, and quality of life. This evening, we're pleased to have a panel of qualified and knowledgeable guest speakers. Greg Tolley, raise your hand, Greg. Greg Tolley is the executive director of the water school at FGCU and our host. We really appreciate what they've done for us.
And did we mention that this is a brand new building? So
yeah, Brandon, you can say whatever you want, Brandon. He is also a professor of marine science at Florida Gulf Coast University and the author of many, many publications on marine ecology and the influence of freshwater inflows into the estuaries. John Cassini is the Calusa waterkeeper emeritus. John just resigned not too long ago, and he was gracious enough to say, sure, I'll come and talk to you folks, but it's going to cost you. John's professional career as an ecologist starts here in Lee County in 1978 after receiving degrees in biology and fish and wildlife. He has authored peer-reviewed scientific publications and popular media sources on resource management, history, water policy, and conservation issues. Matt DePaulis is the environmental policy director.
watch out.
Is the policy director of Sanibel Captiva Conservancy Foundation. Matt has a master's degree in marine biology and Juris Doctorate in environmental, ocean, and coastal law certificates from the University of Oregon. His expertise in environmental law and marine biology supports the foundation's advocacy to improve water quality and protect our natural resources based on science. And Bob Moore is a co-chair of the Sanibel Captiva Renewable Energy Working Group. The working group is a coalition of local organizations focused on advancing energy efficiency and renewable energy to improve resiliency and reduce energy costs. Those are the folks that are going to be telling you the answers to the questions we give them. I and Alan Bowditch, our Chief Communications Officer, will be functioning as moderators. We'll keep the responses to our questions to the panel to a maximum of 10 minutes. We're hoping so because we have about 8 so questions times 10 goes right in there. We want to leave some room for you to raise your hand and get a question answered. After the panel discussions, we do encourage questions and comments and we'll provide you with a microphone. Hopefully that works. The latest we will end these questions is 8 p.m. That's what we said. But if you're really into it, we'll go on as long as you like, okay? The forum is being streamed live right now on Zoom for Zoom meetings, and it is recording. The recording of the event will be available on our website at www.esterotoday.com. So why don't I just get into the questions that we're going to be asking the panelists. The first one is a little statement before the question. There seems to be a significant number who question the scientific findings that the world is experiencing an increase in average temperature that leads to a significant and adverse change in weather patterns, often called global warming or climate change. Some cite that the world has historically been through cycles of extreme cold, e.g. the Ice Age, followed by increases in average temperatures. Others say that even if we attempt to modify it, the level of greenhouse gases we do emit, we cannot dent the effects caused by large polluters such as China and India. So here's the question, and this is to Greg. What is your response to those who question the scientific findings? Greg, you're on.
Yeah, well, the science is very clear and it comes from lots of different lines of evidence. We don't use one line to draw a cause and effect. One of the things I'll point out, Jim, in your preamble there, you mentioned that some people say, in terms of dealing with the science, say, well, climate's fluctuated up and down over time, temperature's changed. Temperatures have not been this warm for the last 125,000 years when humans were still living in Africa and sea level was 33 feet higher than it is now. So that should put things in perspective. What we are dealing with as a society, as a country, as a planet, which is now fully inhabited except for Antarctica, is absolutely unprecedented. So you can't use that kind of history to say everything's going to be okay now. It's just not relevant at all. So that I want to make that very, very clear. The types of science that we're looking at, ocean temperatures from the surface all the way to the deep ocean have been going up since we've been started recording them in 1980. As a matter of fact, some scientists 10, 15 years ago now questioned why aren't we seeing the extra temperature that we would expect with greenhouse gases in the atmosphere? That's because they weren't looking in the deep ocean. And in the deep ocean, a lot of that temperature was being stored. Glaciers have been melting. Now, individual glaciers may be doing okay, but if you look at the global mass of glaciers on our planet, it's been steadily increasing since 1980 when we started measuring it. The polar ice caps are getting smaller as well. And not just sea surface temperature, but global land temperatures are actually going up over time. The mechanism is pretty clear. We've known this since 1896 when a guy named Svante Arrhenius actually said, well, you know, if we keep pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're liable to get global warming. That was well over a century and a quarter ago now that we've known about this. And in the 1980s, we really started paying attention to it. But the science is clear. Greenhouse gases, whether it's carbon dioxide, which is very abundant in the atmosphere, or something like methane or hydrofluorocarbons, which are less abundant but more impactful. Those molecules are complex and they trap heat. And so when solar light and heat comes in from the sun, comes through the atmosphere and then bounces off the earth, it gets trapped by these molecules in the atmosphere and creates the greenhouse effect. The same reason we look to greenhouses when we go to buy plants, or if you're up north, just to stay warm. So the science is, the mechanism is there, the evidence is there, it's many, many sources of evidence. And so it's really unmistakable at this point. I think what we need to be talking about is what can we do to turn things around. I think if we have any sense of intergenerational care, making sure that our kids and our grandkids have at least a good quality of life that we have, let's quit quibbling about how much of it is human induced and how much is natural, and let's get to work.
Okay, the process we put together was we have a lead speaker and then give the opportunity to the other panel members if they have any comments on that same question.
Bob,
go ahead.
Thanks for that. And one thing Jim didn't mention in my introduction is prior to my retirement, where I really focused on my volunteer work related to renewable energy and addressing issues related to climate change, I spent 40 years in business. So I tend to look at these issues also through an economic lens. And independent of the scientific argument. So my disclosure, if I make any scientific statements tonight, I'm not a scientist, but I have sort of dived in and immersed myself. But from an economic standpoint, if you look at the issues that relate to addressing the challenges of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and you know, the burning of fossil fuels is the primary driver of that issue. The technologies that allow us to provide energy that do not burn fossil fuels, renewable energy sources, wind, solar, primarily here in Florida, transitioning to electric vehicles. These energy sources are now significantly cheaper than any source of energy on the planet. And there's a dramatic disruption in technology that's occurring. So whether or not you believe in climate change, if we don't get on board quickly as a country with investments in these disruptive technologies, we're going to be behind the eight ball. China is investing at very high rates in renewable technology, electric vehicles, battery storage, and even though they've got some significant issues, right, they're the number one emitter now of greenhouse gases, they are outspending the rest of the world. Their investments in electric vehicles are greater than all the rest of the world combined. And so we're going to be, really the clean energy is going to be one of the biggest drivers of economic growth globally over the next 20 years. And if we let ourselves sort of get behind the 8 ball, we're missing an opportunity. So there's a real win-win opportunity for us to grow and be, effective from an economic standpoint, while also addressing the underlying issues of climate change.
Thanks, Bob. Matt, John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that we have, when we're talking about these issues, they're usually framed in such a way as it's the climate change debate, or there's a debate going on between two camps that are both informed and they're trying to come to some consensus. And even the framing of this question as a significant number of people are still up in the air about the science, I don't think that's fully true. I think that the science has been settled for a long time. There were reports put out, internal reports since the 50s coming out of oil companies. Chevron has an internal report in 1977 that said if we continue burning fossil fuels, we will see 2 to 3% or 2 to 3 degree increase in our global temperature. And the science has been aligned with that since that report came out. And it's continued in that exact same trajectory and trend. And what we have seen, though, is a huge investment by moneyed interests who stand to lose a lot if we transition away from the things that they're making money in right now. And so they are able to fund large-scale disinformation campaigns that are parroted then through large-scale media empires. And when you take and cherry pick your data, you're able to say, look at this. We're looking at 2013 when this certain glacier in the Arctic added mass. So that disproves the science that you're saying. And if you're not able to actually dive in and evaluate that science, and you don't know the scale of the graph or the specific instance that someone's talking about, then it looks very convincing. But that's not what any of the trends are saying. And the people that are even behind this have understood for a long time that this is the case. And you can look to these oil companies, even in court, in the court case of City of Oakland v. Chevron that was filed in 2017. The Chevron attorney got up and said, we have no issue with all the science, all the climate science that has been submitted. The climate science is not at issue, and we're not arguing that. What we want to argue is that it's not the extraction, it's the burning, and we're not responsible for the burning. So we shouldn't be liable to these cities. And that's what they're on the record as saying, and they're free to admit that. But when then you go on, turn on your television and have a lot of pundits saying the exact opposite, it's easy for people to get overwhelmed. And I don't think that's the fault of anyone, because not everyone can devote their lives towards studying climate science. But I think that we do need to be intellectually honest and be open to having that discussion. And the framing of that discussion is really important.
Thanks, Marinos. Matt, John, any thoughts?
Yeah, if you haven't seen the Conservancy survey they did on climate change, it's pretty revealing and a little bit disturbing in some ways. I'm kind of thinking of episodes of the X-Files, I Want to Believe. But unfortunately, there's a lot of folks that just can't quite get to that point where, yeah, the science answers those questions. And Bob and Matt and Greg addressed those to a degree, and really good job, documenting what's happening with climate change. And so I'm biased. I'm a scientist. I go on empirical information, and I'm still struggling. I know we have different explanations of why, but I'm still kind of struggling with some of the denial that's going on. We might even do a hand survey. Anyone not believe in current climate change science? Raise your hand. I'll put you on the spot. Oh, we're all believers. We all believe. Okay, perfect. End of discussion. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, put all your hands down.
And Jim, can I just make a comment as well?
Yeah,
there?
sure.
I think Matt said something very, very important. There's a lot of deliberate disinformation out there. And so each of us has to be more responsible in terms of vetting that information. So making sure that I tell my mom, my mom is in her 80s now. And so she'll call me and say, I read this on Facebook. And, I've kind of trained her now, but I would tell her, Mom, if that sounds funny, if that sounds strange to you, maybe you should research it. Because, and I'm not picking on Facebook in particular, but there's a lot of misinformation, but there's also deliberate disinformation that's put out there. So each of us as a consumer, whether it's making choices in our lives, whether it's making political or voting choices, or whether it's learning about what's happening in the world around us and how that might impact our kids and the grandkids, we have to be more alert, more informed than we ever have been in the past, because of the effects of, one tweet can go to everybody in this room in 5 seconds here. And that's technology driving information, but it's also being misused. So we have to be more responsible in the way that we take information in, but also vetting information in a way that we really haven't had to in previous generations, I think.
Thanks, Greg. Alan will have the next question.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and thank you, panel, for the answers to the first question. I want to pull things back to our own environment here in Southwest Florida. What are the major threats our community faces over the next 20 years, and what evidence leads you to your conclusion? Greg, would you like to start off on that one?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's pretty clear. It's climate change. I think that's existential problem here in Southwest Florida. If you look at climate predictions by 2100 for Sanibel, for Marco Island, for Southwest Fort Myers, they're gone. They're just underwater. So that's something that you have to deal with. Existentially, there aren't going to be people living there at that time unless we either drastically change our behavior or drastically change how we currently live on the landscape. The Hurricane Ian, I think, is a perfect backdrop for this. The evidence that we have, hurricanes are becoming more intense. I'm talking about the Atlantic Ocean now. They're becoming more intense. We're seeing more Category 4s and 5s than we ever saw in the past. They're increasing their intensity more rapidly. Used to be, you didn't have to worry about the intensity. You were just looking at the storm track. But now these things can change from a 2 to a 4. In the case of Ian, from a 2 to almost 5, just 5 miles an hour slower than a Category 5 hurricane overnight. Those are things that we haven't seen. They're slowing down because they're bigger storms. When a storm slows down, it dumps more rain. So we get a lot more flooding. So we've got the hurricanes. I think the hurricanes that we're seeing now are unprecedented because there's so much energy in the global ocean to be able to fuel those hurricanes. That's where they get their energy from. The number of mega disasters over $1 billion in economic costs per year has risen. If you look at data from 1980 to this last year, it was about 7.9 disasters per year. And that's rated by the Consumer Price Index. So we take care of the difference in what a dollar was worth in 1980 versus what it's worth today, 5 cents. But if you look at it then from that whole period, maybe 7 to 8 per year, we're at 17 to 18 per year now. Disasters that cost over $1 billion. I'm talking about California wildfires. I'm talking about houses falling into the ocean just with nor'easters. I'm talking about hurricanes. I'm talking about the California drought, for example. So the climate is becoming much more extreme than it ever was in the past. And again, that's because there's more energy in the atmosphere and energy in our waters to fuel those extreme events that we didn't see before. Sea level has not only been rising, we know it's been rising. We've been looking at Key West for over 100 years now, the tide gauges at Key West that show us how much sea level is rising, but it's rising at an increasing rate. If you look at data from 1900 to 1921, sea level was rising about 1.5 inches every 10 years. If you look at the data from 2010 to 21, it's 3.7 inches for every 10 years now. That's a drastic change when you're looking at decadal points in time. And when your climate projections are looking, well, what's 2030 going to look like? What's 2050 going to look like? What's 2100 going to look like? Because that's the data that we're looking at now. How many of you experience sunny day flooding now? That's real common down in Naples, common down in Marco Island. It's certainly common in Miami where they have king tides. They've invested $5 billion in creating infrastructure, pumps, raising sidewalks to be able to take care of a high tide that has nothing to do with a hurricane or a tropical storm. Extreme heat, that's something we don't think about because most of us are fortunate enough to be able to live in places and work in places that are air conditioned. But a lot of people in this area don't have that ability. People that work in the construction business, people that work in agriculture, heat stress is a real environmental health problem as well. And that's becoming more and more apparent. And then if you just look at the retreat of our coastlines over time, there are some drastic changes going on. We don't see it individually because of what we call changing baselines. My father remembers what things were when he grew up. I remember what I grew when I grew up, but I don't remember what my father or grandfather knew when they were growing up. So we just see a little bit of change and think, well, things aren't that bad. But if you look intergenerationally, if you talk to your parents, if you talk to your grandparents, this coastline has changed drastically. And so these are all things to think about. Again, the number two threat that we have is population. In 2021, so just a year and a half ago, 546,000 people changed their driver's licenses to Florida. Think about that. That's over 1,000 people per day moving to the state. That's a stress on our infrastructure. That's a stress on roads. That's a stress on freshwater drinking supplies. That's a stress in terms of additional pollutants that are going into the atmosphere. That's certainly a stress on fossil fuel combustion because of the amounts of cars that are on the roads these days with that kind of population. And that's a stress on things like alternate land use. Wetlands are the kidneys of the earth in terms of filtering the water in our planet. Agriculture is very, very important in the state of Florida. It's now looking very, very attractive for agriculture to sell out their lands because they can make a one lump payment that's probably going to be much more than they'll make the rest of their lives working a farm, even if it's a big farm. So changes in land use are exacerbating the climate change issue as well. So for me, it's climate change and it's population. And so we're always trying to shoot a moving target. And that's really, really tough to do.
Matt, would you like to maybe just take that one on? And are there any other issues that you'd like to add as threats to our community that you see? We've just got a couple of minutes left, but I'd like you to take that one if you would.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think that Greg made a couple of great points, and I think that they both resonate with a larger issue, which is just the lack of forethought with a lot of these problems that we're facing. With climate change, we're not taking an honest look at what we need to do to slow it down, stop it, and build for resilience. With population, we seem to believe that we can just keep doing things the way we've always been doing and it'll be fine. And I see that reflected in the rampant development in this area. I see it with the idea that one more road is going to solve traffic. And we really need to be thinking about new solutions and what this means down the road, whether that's more public transportation that can take some of these cars off the road, not just going along with our leaders who want to push development interests in dangerous areas. Developing in the coastal high hazard area, for example, is objectively not a great decision for an area that's being hit by increasingly dangerous storms year after year. And we see this kind of head in the sand attitude of whether or not we accept what's happening. Well, let's try to get the last dollar we can out of this area. Let's just do one more development. Let's add one more development with septic in, and not understanding that all of these add up to the larger compounding issues that we're facing. And we're starting to see how those compounding issues are going to play out. And unless we take action to really protect this area and all of our areas for future generations, and ask not just what does this look like on the books 5 years from now, but what does this look like for a community 50 years from now, I don't think we're going to have any livable future.
Thank you, Matt. Bob, John, do you want to just add any further remark before we finish on this one?
I'd like to just comment. First of all, Greg, that was an awesome answer. Really good. And I'm sitting here looking at my notes, and they're almost verbatim, glancing at Greg's notes. So I don't have a lot of new content to add, but I will say that I was really struck by the contrast between the comment Greg made that in 2100, we may not have a coastline where many of the, I live on Sanibel. I have a real selfish motivation. If we don't make significant changes. Now, I'm a grandfather. I spent my career in healthcare, but my retirement has been focused on these issues because I think they are the issues of our lifetime. And so I guess what I just wanted to underscore is the urgency of this issue, especially for us in this region. We're facing some of the most dramatic impacts of climate change, and yet at a regional level and at a state level, there's a conversation about adaptation, but there is no real depthful conversation around changing the power source that drives our economy. And that's what we need to do. We need to make rapid changes. And again, I'll put in my plug for the fact that the economic incentives for doing that are present. There's no reason not to. When you hear somebody say we can't afford to address these issues of climate change, I think the real response there is we can't afford not to.
John, any thoughts?
Yeah, just two quick, and it's already been covered, but for me, as a community ecologist, I think landscape change as a result of growth and development, which has been mentioned. And concurrent with that is climate change, extreme hydrology, which is really impacting, creating sort of this cascade, ecological cascade event that's really disturbing what's going on right now. So those are just two that really resonated with me.
Thanks, John. Okay, the next question. And again, it's like Alan, I'm going to keep it a little local here. Many have expressed concern about the dramatic increase in housing developments along East Corkscrew Road. Concerns focus on the threat to our water supply, the replenishment of aquifers, and the impact on the ecology and the wildlife it supports. So I have two related questions. Do you consider these concerns justified? And how can we manage the level of development in an environmentally balanced way? I'm going to ask you, John, to lead that off.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So perhaps the proper context this question is, where are we at in terms of water quality and changes in the landscape and being an ecologist, I'm really concerned about what's happening in our back bays and coastal ecosystems. I've been here a long time, 40+ years. I've been a resource manager, a little research, applied research as well. What we're seeing is this monumental shift in productivity from seagrass and climate algae and macroalgae. Wonder why manatees are starving, losing seagrass at a tremendous rate. And part of this is because of this landscape change. So you're going to hear a lot of narratives that say, well, we're going to improve the aquifer. We're gonna do something better on water quality. We're not going to consume as much water. Corkscrew corridor is a good number of public water supply wells in that region. And I can think of at least one development that is in that region. Actually, there's almost 20,000 acres of either developments that are in the pipeline or already permitted. And again, I'm going a little bit long, but part of the driver here is the legislature keeps doubling down on J. Harris Act, taking claims, private property rights. Well, what about the public interest? What about the general public to experience these declining ecosystems? Them personally. So I think the legislature has gone a little too far on J. Harris Act claims. This is what, you hear county commissioners say, well, we'll get sued if we don't get to develop what they want. J. Harris is about reasonable expectations of investment. It's not about whatever they rubber stamp. It's not supposed to work that way. My view. So all these things are happening concurrently. Climate change, landscape change, major impacts of flora and fauna, declining ecosystems in terms of water quality, their economic impacts, property values, public health, harmful algorithms, significant public health risk on a lot of issues. So I covered a lot of ground there. I'm trying to do that as quick as I could. I got some baggage there. Not this surname that our organization had tremendous group of volunteers that helped us. So it's not a single person. We've got so many people together and coming together like this is community forums.
Thank you. Anyone else have a thought? Okay, good. Let me go on to the next question. What specific initiatives would you recommend for the greater Estero area to help reduce the carbon monoxide levels, the carbon footprints, the greenhouse gases? Any thoughts about that? And Bob, I'll sort of give it to you. Sure.
The two largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in our state, and this is not typical of what you see nationally, but in Florida, the two largest are transportation and electricity generation. Together, they account for about 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So they're the two obvious places to look and to focus on first. In terms of electricity, I'll just put in a plug right now. The group that I work with is collaborating with Solar United Neighbors to establish a Southwest Florida solar co-op for Lee County and for Collier County. That co-op is live and active now. So if any of you are ever thought that you were interested in looking at solar for your home or business, there's an opportunity to join that co-op. One of the advantages there is that you can get unbiased perspective around whether it really does make sense for you without a sales pitch. And then if you do decide to go forward with solar for the co-op, you get the power of a group purchase, so you can potentially save some money there. There's also tremendous new incentives that are available through federal legislation that passed last year. So you can receive a 30% credit on your federal taxes to offset some of the costs of solar and storage if you're interested in that. And for the first time ever, those incentives are also available to nonprofits, to municipalities. So you may want to speak to your folks in the city of Estero about opportunities there. Since those groups don't pay federal tax, there's a provision in the law that allows for direct payment of that 30% credit for those organizations to receive. And given how fresh the impacts of Hurricane Ian are, there's a certain comfort to the potential resiliency of being able to have solar paired with battery backup. And there's a lot of stories of people who've been in that position who actually made it through the storm without any loss of power. So that's an opportunity. I think cities can also look at their building codes, provide incentives or mandates or both for energy efficiency standards, solar energy, EV infrastructure. I was at an event last week where the key sponsor was Hertz, and the director of social responsibility talked about the fact that Hertz is committed to having half of their fleet transition to EVs in just a year or two. Very exciting. You heard a lot about land conservation and all the benefits that can come with that in terms of not just water quality, but carbon sequestration is a critical piece there. Mangroves are tremendously powerful in sequestering carbon. So protecting our open spaces. And then one last thing I'll mention is also involved with a group that is driving a petition effort for statewide to add a right to clean water to the Florida Constitution. And that would be a very powerful way for us to ensure that some of the missing policy in the development plans that are present can be challenged and taken care of. So I encourage you to go to the Florida Right to CleanWater.org if you're interested in checking that out and signing that petition. We need a lot of signatures. So please jump into that. And if you're interested in the solar co-op, it's solarunitedneighbors.org/SWFL. So those are my little plugs.
Any of you other folks have any other thoughts on that? Share?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Bob has talked about requires a special kind of personal agency, and you are becoming engaged and active, whether it's talking in your communities or talking with your legislators or voting, because these are things that are occurring at the municipality level. These are things that are occurring at the utility or industry level. And so that it's really exciting to see this many people here tonight. You're engaged, you're active. We have 4 votes at during each election. It looks to me like with what we have online, you have 130 votes. So that's very important for you to remember. You have a vote. You can work with and talk with your homeowners associations, talk to your neighbors, and vote for the thing. It's very, very important. But personal agency can also be what you do in your home. Two of the things that are actually most advantageous and potentially reducing greenhouse gases. So the mitigation part, let's not wait we need to build resilient communities that are more resilient, that bounce back. If we don't do that, we're just going to have to adapt, which means live with it, right? And actually stop the greenhouses going in, and that's the only real long-term solution to this problem. Things you can do, less food waste. Because that's just agriculture, methane production, especially that's going into the atmosphere that's unneeded. Eating more of a plant-based diet. And I'm a carnivore, and that's hard for me to say. But actually, that actually can globally reduce methane and other radiatively active gases going into the atmosphere as well. LED lighting, energy efficiency appliances, these are all things that you can do at the individual level. It doesn't necessarily have to be waiting for a utility to do something or waiting for a government to do something. So personal agency operates at different scales.
Else have any comments? Yeah? No? Okay.
Well, thank you. Related to water quality, which you've just been speaking about, I just wondered if maybe I could get a bit more specific with this question. How concerned are you about the quality of our water, and what do you suggest we do to improve water quality in the short and longer term? And Matt, if you'd like to take that one.
Very concerned. I think that as someone who works and plays on Sanibel and in Barrier Islands, surrounded by water, as everyone in Southwest Florida is, and it's it's degrading, and I don't think there's really anything that anyone can say counter to that. Every year, we're seeing more impaired water bodies. We're seeing harmful algal blooms that are lasting longer, that are becoming more intense. We're seeing a lot of things that have already been mentioned here today. A new species of macroalgae that have never been seen in Manoshea that are outcompeting the seagrass. All of these things are directly related to nutrient pollution, and that's pollution of our water. When people talk about water pollution, people think about pipe coming out of a factory and depositing sludge into a river, catching fire back in before we had the Clean Water Act, or heavy metals and something like that. But the fact of the matter is that most of our water bodies are impaired by the pollutants of nitrogen and phosphorus, which come from a myriad of sources, whether that's ag runoff that comes directly out of the fields or percolation into the groundwater and isn't controlled by the same mechanisms that a polluted factory would be. Same goes for stormwater runoff, even the runoff from you irrigating and fertilizing your personal lawn. All of these compound and add nutrients to our water that then feeds these algal blooms and degrades the quality of life, the speed at which our economy functions, and the environment and the life of the environment communities that exist around here. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. I think there's a lot of people working to ensure that those things are done. There's a lot of momentum right now for clean water and to fix this impaired water. I think we have an opportunity to capitalize on that. A lot of investment has been put forth towards the restoration. There's been a lot of investment towards flashy innovations for mitigation, and that's all great because we do need a way to deal with these algal blooms because they're here and they're happening. They've been here forever. The red tide, the Carina brevis organism, exists naturally. It's in the Gulf. It's been in the Gulf since the conquistadors first sent journals home talking about it. But they haven't seen them at these rates. And we know now that it's anthropogenic nutrients, that's man-made nutrients that are flowing into these water bodies that are exacerbating red tide and making them work less longer and be worse for everyone involved with them. Great ways to deal with it on your own is don't use fertilizer on your lawn, don't irrigate as much as you need to. You can replace a lot of your plantings with native plants, which is what we do on Sanibel to try to rein in some of that pollution. But it also needs to be, it's not going to be an individual effort to solve this. We need better basin management action plans to actually enact some of these practices in our water bodies. And they need to work for the causes that our waters are cited for. We need better best management practices for our agriculture. And all of these things best management practices are voluntary. So if those aren't working and they're not being enacted in quickly enough to the greatest degree, then maybe there needs to be incentives so that people will take some of these actions to improve the water that comes off their lands. I think that there's a lot of tools out there. Bob mentioned the Right to Clean Water Act amendment to our Constitution. That would be a huge tool because the fact is that we do have a lot of great legislation to protect the water of this state. The gap comes with the enforcement mechanism because if we don't have leaders and agencies that are willing to stand up and actually enforce the legislation that's on the books, then it might as well not be there. But this act that you mentioned, this amendment that you mentioned, would give individual citizens of Florida a right to bring those agencies to court to make them do their job, essentially. So I think things like that would be an excellent tool for our toolbox. There's great creative solutions out there, such as using nature-based solutions to mitigate some of the nutrients that are already in water. There's work being done to see how many clams we would need to dump into a bay to start cleaning it, how many oils we put in to enact some sort of meaningful change in a canal or in a bay. And then great solutions like partnering with some of the farmers that grow these organisms and see if we can give them credit for their nutrient removal services that they're already providing to us and allow them to grow more of their product, keep their product in the water longer. And if something terrible happens, like a red tide that makes it so they can't bring their market, they can keep farming those animals and keep utilizing the services that, or we can keep utilizing the services that they're providing for us, and they won't go out of business and have to fire all their staff because now suddenly
their claims are too big to be considered a liquidating claim. There's a lot of great work being done, but I think it needs to follow through with all the talk that we're hearing about it. And I think we're at a great moment to do that because we've thrown a lot of money at the problem and don't want to see it backtrack.
Thank you, Matt. John, or any of the other panel members?
Yeah, maybe a little more pragmatic about it in that there's a paradox at work. So if the legislature is promoting growth at any cost without any equity in terms of the public paying for the cost that growth demands, putting that burden almost completely on the schools, roads, water quality restoration. But at the same time, got their hand out saying, we need more money to fix these problems. So one's causing it, and the other is false narrative as a solution. I don't think you can buy your way out of this. Having, as Matt said, effective enforcement and compliance. If you don't have it, you're going backwards. Nitrogen loading and acoustic action, basin management action plans been in effect since 2012, 10 years, a decade. Water management district determined that nitrogen loading is 7% in 10 years. And that's not because stakeholders are spending millions of dollars on load reduction. The growth is driving and putting more pollutants in the water currently. So we're going backwards instead of it's not going off, it's going down. And so understanding and reading these documents is hard and granted, but when you distill them and you've been following this stuff for a very long time, pattern starts to play out and the trajectory is not great. So we've got to fix the system that's broken, the legal system that really is broken. They say in Florida, you got to pay to play. And if you don't have the money, go to court to try and enforce water law, the national water law, you're kind of stuck. Okay. So just kind of my view on something. Yes, I'm very concerned.
Thank you. Well, we just have one more question before we turn it over to all of you to ask your questions. So Jim, if you want to pick up the last question before we move things forward.
Since the last question, and I'm going to ask Greg to answer it. What environmental initiatives are you working on now that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, a lot. It's some of the ones you might be most interested in. In the wake of Hurricane Ian, the National Science Foundation has something called RAPIDS program. These are rapid response grants. So when something unforeseen happens, you can get out there and start collecting the research and the data as soon as possible. We have been awarded, I think it was 4 now, RAPIDS grants this year. So we're actually out in coastal waterways trying to see what the impact of Hurricane Ian was. Bob was referring to the HERT sponsorship earlier. That was the Climate and Community Summit that we held down at Arthrex last week. One of our faculty members showed before and after drone footage. LiDAR, which is radar using lasers. It gives you very, very precise centimeter accuracy elevation levels or topographic levels. And the before and after pictures up and down our coastline were just amazing, especially Lotus Key. He just got just about wiped out on the northern and southern ends of Black Island. We're trying to facilitate or lead the charge for the Southwest Florida Regional Resiliency Coalition. This is 12 municipalities and 3 counties that are coming together to leverage to adapt to climate change, but also to build more resilient communities. We have a partnership with the University of Florida called ACUNE. I had to write this down because I can never remember what ACUNE stands for, but it's Adaptation of Coastal, Urban, and Natural Ecosystems. This is a web-based decision support tool. So county managers, city planners can actually go into this web base and build a scenario. We have a hurricane that's going this fast, this far offshore. What do we think the implications will be in terms of flooding, in terms of storm surge? And we forecasted Ian. In other words, we used the ACUNE model and then we fed it
and how fast it was going, the direction it's going. So really good match with the type of storm surge and the flooding that occurred as a result of the storm. So those kinds of analytical tools that can help decision makers at the municipality level, at the county level, at the agency level, very important. And then I'd say our other big initiatives have to do with harmful outcomes. So when you look at the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the DEP websites that show what the red tide concentrations are off Fort Myers Beach, for example, that's us. We're going up to 90 miles offshore, diving, collecting samples. We're doing some innovative technologies to see if we can identify red tide early when it's offshore before it becomes a huge problem. When it gets carried inshore, with the nutrients that we have in coastal waters, it tends to intensify. So if we can identify it earlier and figure out what's causing it earlier, we might be able to mitigate it early in the stage. Once it gets to be 130 miles long and 40 miles wide, which it was 2017 and 2019, you're going to have to destroy an entire ecosystem to get rid of the bloom that size. And then blue-green algae, we have a number of initiatives with Dr. Group Blue-Green Algae. Barry Rosen actually works here at the water. We still have the U.S. Geological Survey. So we have a lot of students that are looking at what environmental conditions create a bloom, what genes turn on and off that might create toxins, how are those toxins getting into our bodies, they aerosolizing and coming into our lungs, and what's the public health risk associated with those blooms. So I would say those are really emerging right now that we're putting a lot of resources into.
So any thoughts?
Sure. So the working group that I'm a part of, Sanibel Captiva Renewable Energy Working Group, is a fairly hyper-local initiative looking specifically at how can we address issues of energy use in our local community. But the intent of this group was to demonstrate successes in a particular context and then use that as a lever to engage other communities in the region, particularly related to the cost savings that are possible through investments in energy efficiency, renewable energy. So we're working with the city of Sanibel currently to gather data initially. We want to be very targeted and data-based in the planning. So the city will be conducting an energy audit of all of its facilities and transportation fleet in this year's budget to give us the data to assess where can we identify the best returns on investment in terms of changes the city could enact. We've also recently, we're in the process post Hurricane Ian of assembling a coalition of citizens and other community groups to focus on a resiliency task force to look at a combination of issues related to the built environment, the natural systems, to really be a resource post-hurricane to help citizens, businesses understand what their opportunities are for building back more resiliently, hardening their structures, but also thinking about the opportunity to make structures more efficient, better use of energy. And I think in both of those cases, our group would be more than interested if there's a body of citizens in Estero that wants to kind of work off of that model to collaborate and support that.
Yeah, happy to. Coastal Water Keeper is working on three particular generalized major areas. One is legislation. We have a bill before the legislature right now. Last year, it's called the Safe Waterways Act, actually a Republican co-sponsor on it this time. So we'll see. Maybe water it down a little bit, but this is about mostly reform on public notification regarding health risks for things like fecal bacteria. A long ways to go on Florida on this issue. We're also working hard and collaborating with FTCU to a degree on the health risk associated with aerosolized toxins that get in the air from blue-green algae. We have a patent pending on the technology we've developed to measure it. We've entered into what I think is a landmark cooperative agreement with the brain chemistry labs in Wyoming, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They're doing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of research in terms of analyzing these spinal toxins. They have a publication next year on this. But again, policy reform is a big one for us. The VMAPs are not working. This MS water permit programs are not working. They get rubber stamped at every permit interval that comes along. We need a paradigm change. And so those are kind of some of the things.
Thanks very much, Joe. Appreciate that. Okay, as Alan said, that was the last question from us. So let me just wrap it up our piece of it and we'll take it to the next phase. We hope you have a better understanding of a variety of things that we talked about here. Why the world is experiencing an increase in average temperature, leading to significant and adverse change in the water quality and water patterns, significant threats to our community over the next 20 years, how we can manage the level of development in an environmentally balanced way, what initiatives Greater Estero can take that would reduce warming trends and help reduce our carbon footprint, and how our community can improve our water quality in the short term. We've also heard specific recommendations, follow this Right to Clean Water Act. Big deal, big deal. Watch it closely wherever you can. If you have to sign petitions, write to your officials, whatever it may be, do it and do these kinds of things. So I suggest that take place in the community. It's not outside, it's where we are right now. The other thing is, I'm very familiar with Bob talking about the Sanibel Captiva renewable energy work. We've had many, many conversations about this with the objective to bring it to Estero. And we will be talking more about how that could take place going down the road. So these are the kinds of things that we think you've learned today. Thanks to the experts and experienced panel for participating in this public forum. By the way, this is one of many that will be going on that the ECCL, soon to be engaged Estero, will be moving forward on. To bring people together to hear, to get the information, and to encourage engagement. That's what it's really all about. What you've got to do, we all have to do to make it work. So you'll find that this was recorded, this meeting was recorded, and it will be on our website, www.esterotoday.com shortly. So now, it's your turn. Now, we have the opportunity to ask questions, make comments, raise your hand, and we'll provide you with a microphone. We have two people that will be going around, and they'll give you a mic. Take it one at a time. Zero.
Before this spring, two quick questions, and I know. Any one of you heard about the possibility of Spring Creek Basin becoming a VMAP? I take it from the silence that no one's heard anything about it.
Well, you have to have a TMDL. So the VMAP implements the total maximum daily load as Spring Creek is verifying their nutrients now. The state's not developing new TMDLs. Until they do, there won't be a VMAP.
Thank you. And I've had a little bit of dealings with Conservation 2020. They're not buying a lot of land. And is there any recommendation from any of you as to how we can make that happen a little more often and to conserve more property?
Well, I sat on the advisory committee class act for 17 years. I chaired it for a good part of that time. The first 15 years of the program, we were averaging about 1,500 acres a year. Good times and bad times, section. Boom. But since about 2012, so much, averaging about 100 acres a year, roughly. That includes the Kuiper Reserve, which was a huge acquisition, but it averages out to probably less than 100 acres a year. And it seemed to be going down even more. So I don't want to read too much into that. Some people, I hear the narrative that there isn't enough land to buy advantage availability. But let me remind you that in 2016, highest plurality on any environmental referendum in the country. The second highest is the Butte County's endorsement of the conservation program. And at 84% plurality, people want it. They're demanding it. They're willing to tax themselves to do it. Why isn't it happening? So, and your way to change that. I don't work for a nonprofit anymore. I'm going to be a little more political, I suppose. But you have to change your activity. So if you really value that program, maybe changing the trajectory we're on, your or ballot box, and so figure it out. Thank you, John.
Question right here.
I think the local mitigation effect that you all mentioned are really good. But to my way of thinking, the population of North America was maybe, let's make a guess, about 500 million in the year 1980. So that's when the population of the Earth was 1 billion. So now the population of North America is 600,000, 40 years later. The population of the world is about 8 billion. So, I mean, we have local effects that we can do. We can have a federal mitigation effect. But if you don't have world mitigation effect, it's all really tiny little things that are meaningless. The other thing too is, if you have a growth in Florida, 1,000 or 1,500 people a day. So that adds up to, say you have 500,000 come to Florida. Well, they're also leaving somewhere else, so the carbon footprint elsewhere is decreasing, even though it's increasing here locally. So I just like to make those comments, and I really think the elephant in the room is a population issue, and really on a huge level, that should feel that.
No question here.
No, you're saying that one of the real problems of the food hatching is the nutrient there. Is there a schedule of when the Okeechobee will then start being directed south instead of into the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie River?
Well, there's a pretty complex relationship there because while the Caloosahatchee did start off as its own water source and its own watershed, in the 1800s it was connected to Lake Okeechobee, and now we rely on minimum flows in the dry season to make sure that the salinity gradient at the mouth of that estuary doesn't flow too far one way or the other and really start affecting the tape grass. Hopefully there will not be a time that it's fully disconnected from Lake Okeechobee. That being said, we are getting flows most of the season right now. Right now, we've been right at the top of optimal flows basically since Ian, and the lake has not gone down at all. It's been sitting right at about 16.1 feet. Since then, that's what it is today. And while I was at the Herbert Hoover Dike rehabilitation ribbon cutting today, so now we can keep the lake a little higher, which is good for the Caloosahatchee in terms of water storage, not necessarily so for the lake environment there. The crux of the matter is storage, quality, and quantity of water, because we can't start sending water south until it meets the quality standards of phosphorus to hit 10 parts per billion before it goes into the Everglades. There's a lot of people that have been working a long time, certainly before my time, and we're working every day to try to move towards that, but it's going slow, and it back down to an issue of where to put the solutions. The Everglades used to stretch from the southern tips of Okeechobee down to Florida Bay. Between that, so whether we're talking about rejuvenating flows or inputting STAs or putting a concrete box with some sort of treatment option in there, all of those things take a lot of money and land acquisition to do. And right now it's been said that up here a couple times that the best use of land for a farmer to make a huge lump sum of money is, and I get the sense that there are a lot of people who are waiting for that payday to come in. There there are options available to getting land. There's no desire at leadership levels to enact anything like eminent domain to take land. And so what that means is we need to come up with more creative solutions. For the Caloosahatchee specifically, that means that there's been a water budget that's been put out there, and there's a lot of red that just says we need some way to hold 100,000 acre feet, and there's no project on the books for moving forward for that. So I don't have a good answer for you as a strict timeline. I think that people are hoping it's going to get there, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done before we can.
I would just like to add too that this is where you can help. This is the Blaze Restoration Plan, and the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee are considered the northern estuaries component. So anything that doesn't go south from the lake goes east or goes west over here. So it's important to the governor just, I think 2 weeks ago now, that he wants his administration to commit $3.5 billion to Everglades restoration and water quality improvements in general over the next 4 years. Made a similar announcement just a few days after being inaugurated, committing, I think it was $3 billion at that time. The federal government is not doing its part in terms of matching what Florida is doing. The National Academy of Sciences has just put out a call for a blue ribbon panel to actually look at the 50-some projects that have already been started and look at the projects that haven't been started to see if they're actually meeting their targets. So that will be interesting to see. Another kind of elephant in the room is people always point at Lake Okeechobee, and that's very important. But about 1 out of every 2 drops of water that comes into the Caloosahatchee comes in not from Lake Okeechobee, but from actually the Caloosahatchee water basin itself. So between the lake and the Pocket Dam and then the creeks and tributaries farther downstream. So we have to focus on the water quality within the Caloosahatchee basin itself and not just expect Lake Okeechobee to fix it.
Just one, I think, just one real quick thing, the legislation that enabled the plumbing of South Florida, the replumbing of South Florida, it's the Central and Southern Florida Project, 1947. And until that act is amended or changed in a meaningful way, it brings more equity to the environment and the resources opposed to consumptive users. Nothing really substantive is going to change in terms of the water style. So I talked to you afterwards more about that, but to me, that is the landmark legislation that really needs to be changed to get us back to have an equitable situation. And you can only squeeze the lake so much. It's like any blood from the trying to just get an unlimited amount. We have a constitutional amendment before us, proposal before us, and that will give us standing, I think, so you don't have to take and play and get into court.
Question.
Well, I do think, John, you asked a great question, which is what about the rights of the people? And I thank Bob and Matt for bringing attention to the Rights to Clean Water Act. I think it is also worth noting that other states have green amendments, Pennsylvania, Montana, and most recently New York. They have been effective protecting the environment for their citizens. In Florida, in 2020, our state legislature went out of its way to preempt the authority of local governments to give rights to water to its citizens. I think that indicates just how effective an approach to environmental protection, a rights-based approach is. Anyway, if you'd like to know a little bit more about the amendment, I know a little bit, and I can hang around here for a little while.
Tell us who you are.
I'm Joseph Benazia, and I chair Florida Rights and Nature Network, and also Communications Director for Florida Rights Clean Water.org, the organization that is sponsoring the event.
Thanks. Thank you.
Jim, I think the audience would also the legislature now to require an increased number of signatures to get that ballot question out there by a significant amount. So this is where you need to engage all your legislators that, why are you doing this? Why are you taking our rights away by doing this legislation? It's really important that they hear from you about these kind of issues.
Amen.
I just like to put in real quick, glad you brought that up. it would raise that threshold from 60 to 66%. And these are the kind of preemption bills that they're working their way through committee, and we're really keeping an eye out on that. So it is really important that you call your legislator when these bills come up. These calls matter. They listen to them and they like to know what people are saying. And if you ever want to be watching these committees for you, we have action alerts at CCF that you can go on our website and sign up for, and an email alert, and it's really easy. You can hit a button and
My name is Andrew Bregman. I am one of the 50,000 or 500,000 licenses that have come to the state in the past 10 years that maybe has created some of this problem. But I really appreciate the intelligent language and discussion from the panelists. My takeaway, as we are approaching the end of this, is twofold. One, the gentleman who talked about the business end of getting this problem fixed, and I don't know names, I apologize. And two, the gentleman who said, what we need is a paradigm shift. So everything I've heard tonight has been, one way or another, a reaction to the problems that have been developed over the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The question I'd like to ask, taking everyone's comfort a little bit away from their expertise, is where do you think a paradigm shift will come? I do think it will come, but from what avenue of technology or science will a paradigm shift come that will revolutionize all of the problems that we have? For example, will it be new electrochemical processes that turn batteries into something that can be made more easily, cheaply, renewable, and all of a sudden make our problem with pollution from vehicles go down, not to zero initially? It may take 10 years, it may take 20 years, but if we get there. Or will it be some advance in wind power or solar power, the same kind of dynamic there? Or lastly, just to put a bug out for people to think about, could it be nuclear fusion technology, which is just in its nascent phase now? But if that were to come into existence in the next 10 to 20 years, would totally revolutionize all of the issues that lead to 95% of our problems. You know, the biggest one in terms of climate is the fact that the Gulf of Mexico is 90 degrees. And so just a question, if panelists have an idea or a thought, I'd love to hear it. And I'd like to thank all of you for your discussion.
Yeah, I think the technology is here. If you look at just wind and solar themselves, as I mentioned earlier, they are now the cheapest source of power generation in almost all the world. There's some places in China where coal is still cheaper, unfortunately, so there's still some coal development happening there, but that's going to change. And the rate of improvement this technology is made, solar has doubled in efficiency in the last 15 years or so, and it's half as expensive as it used to be. If you're interested in the space, I'd encourage you to check out a website by a group called Rethink X. It's an organization that has been, it's kind of a think tank that has been very effective at predicting disruptive technologies. And there's really interesting write-ups there around what's happening in solar, wind, and battery storage. I think there is the holy grail of fusion, but it's been 10 years away in the last 20 years. So I think that there's some exciting developments that happen there, but if you read more deeply into that, I think you'll find some pretty deep skepticism about that really being practical. Certainly not in the next 10 years. We'd love it to, but the amount of technology advancement that needs to happen there is pretty. But yeah, I think it's here, and it's happening rapidly.
And I would add to that, I'll give a full self-disclosure here too. I'm not an economist, just as Bob is not a scientist here. but the market drives these things. So you have to want them for the production to go up and the cost to go down. So any new technological product has to have a consumer to be able to do that. So that's where your personal actions, whether it's purchasing certain technologies yourself or promoting them, or talking to your congressman or local leader, that this is something we need to do, this is something maybe we need to subsidize for a few years, that the market can pick up. But the market drives a lot of these things in New York.
Yes, one more thing I'd add in is that as we do see a transformation in our energy sources, there's massive amount of work that we need to do to upgrade our national electrical grid and to develop a smart grid to be able to integrate distributed renewable energy, not only sort of centralized monopoly utilities, which Florida surprisingly is in a state that proposed, sort of presents itself as a free market economy based priority, is given an entire monopoly to our utility industry, where in other parts of the country, there's deregulation happening and a lot more innovation happening in this space. So upgrading and smartening our power grid is also going to be a powerful source of transformation.
Thanks, Bob. Anybody else?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with you in the audience. I know all of you would like to thank the panel for their wonderful, wonderful contribution to our evening. So could we give them a round of applause?
Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
I just want to offer a practical solution, okay, from my perspective, my lived experience. I think when I've lived here 20 years, moving baselines occurred, not only within my lifetime, but within the time I've been here in the last 20 years. Thank you. So, you go to these commission meetings, you go to the municipal council meetings, and it's the same old, same old. We're approving the same development plans over and over again. It's the same blueprint. These developers show up with a phalanx of consultants that have devised their own science and convinced the elected officials that this science is the science. And yet here we sit in this is the water school, right? I mean, you have this incredible think tank here of unbiased science going on, but I don't see it applied to the greater community. How can we close that gap? How can we close that gap? So I'm not the only one speaking at that podium when they make a development approval for 10,000 homes on the end of You know what I'm saying? These are real impacts. I mean, this is where the change is happening. This is where the needle is moving out there, and it's not moving in the right direction. I hate to say this. I mean, everything you guys suggested is absolutely on point. Yet none of it is being implemented. How do we close that gap? That's my question.
Yes, so I'd say we are active in the community, and one of the things we need to do is we need to hear what your concerns are. Because we need to have better communication between our communities. Well, we don't want to come in and say, these are your problems, here's how we're going to fix them, and we're going to fix them. I come from West Virginia. I don't have a sense of place that's Florida. I've had to pick that up since the 1980s, right? So I've had to educate myself, talking to people like you. And now in terms of implementing things, I still need to talk to people like you. You take a little bit from Sun Tzu. Anybody read that book? By the time you go to a podium at a city council meeting, it's too late. Okay, you need to be working behind the scenes. You need to be talking to your representatives. You need to be talking to the communities. It's too late by the time you go into war. All right, so that's my advice on that. But we accept that kind of criticism as well, and we hope to do in the coming decades is serve our students, our communities, and we want that to be two-way communication between our school, so we can address specifically the issues that you were concerned about.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody?
I'd like to ask something. I belonged to the Sierra Club for many, many years. Do they still buy land? Does the Sierra Club still buy land?
No, they don't buy that, but they advocate for it. There's conservation Collier, there's Florida Forever, there's many at the state level. There is There is a program that buys land, there is one in the county conservation 2020, there's one in Collier County Conservation Collier. But Sierra Club is allocated.
I know, years ago, they did buy land, by using the donations from individuals to part of the program. And they bought thousands and thousands of acres across the United States. Sir, I'm disappointed to hear that they don't.
There are national land trusts and local land trusts that use for that purpose as well as the groups that did it.
Got a question back.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to ask the panel, in their opinion, what do you think should be doing, as one of you said, effective client enforcement? The authorities having jurisdiction around here are village, county, state, Corps of Engineers, but, are we headed towards water cuts? Where you don't take care of it, you get arrested or you get fined or something like that. And who would effectively be that compliant authority? Would it be the county, the sheriff's department? And I'd like your opinion on that. Where would that? I'm specifically talking about the almost 3 million septic systems in the state. The percentage that are non-compliant is 40% or something like that. So if we could get those to be in compliance, wouldn't that be a positive effect on especially the people of California that we're having? And there is some in Spring Creek and in Superior River. So I'd like your opinion on who would be the effective enforcement authority to make these people compliant.
So effective is the key word there. Typically, our advocacy organizations see federal court as the cut. That's the Waterkeeper Alliance. You know, if you're not in compliance with Clean Water Act, we'll see you in court. Federal court in 90 days. We'll give you 60-day notice. But it's hugely expensive. The courts aren't as neutral as they used to be. And you risk setting negative case law. Comes back to bite you later. So it's really trial by fire. You know, it all gets back to community. It all gets back to how people are impacted personally, how much they'll tolerate. And it really has to do at grassroots level. It can't be a top down, because top down is not working. Until we rescind Citizens United, the system is broken. It's a top down. So it's you folks are going to have to affect change. You have to be the change, okay? Happens, you know, we're going to be asking these questions for a long time into the future. And we're on the precipice now, the edge now, losing some of these ecosystems. I mentioned some of the paradigm shifts that are going on ecologically. And once you set tipping point, your primary productivity shift, you don't get it back. Especially with a warming climate, which drives these stressors more rapidly, more fundamentally for a longer period of time. So, and I just love seeing somebody here, because here's the seed of, and it's very, very encouraging to see it. But you have to implement it as best way you can. And we're here to try to our biases over here for the I hope for the bring some equity and share diversity to manage these.
Okay, there are no other questions. I do want to ask Gary Bogue, who is the FGCU Director of Development at FGCU, obviously, to briefly comment on FGCU's foundation. We're to do this public forum. Well,
So you said 20 minutes, right?
yeah.
What did you say?
2 seconds.
All the fundraisers are used to adding a zero to everything. So here's what I heard today. I've made a list of everything. Rising sea levels, climate change, agriculture, changes in land use, population, water quality, clean water, seagrass, hurricanes, mangroves, blue-green algae, red tide. This all affects our communities, right? This is pretty scary stuff we heard tonight. It was pretty quiet in here for a long time, going through all this. But I want you all to rest easy tonight. What I want you to know is that the water school, this is what we do for a living. Okay? We do this for a living and we do it for your communities. Yes, things may be slow coming out of here, but I'll tell you one thing that helps is we're teaching tomorrow's scientists. And what we're doing is, and we're also doing research. And all those areas listed tonight, they take private dollars to accelerate solutions. And this is a beautiful 4-story building. Everybody loves coming here. But what goes on in here can affect change in your community. And that takes private dollars to do. It took a hurricane for us to get emergency money to look at some of this stuff. The government just doesn't dole that out like they should. So it took an emergency for us to get those areas like, the lighter that we did, the Southwest Florida Coalition that Greg mentioned earlier. It takes private dollars, and that comes from each and every one of you. So when you go to bed tonight, think about one area that affects you, because we're studying it here, and we could use your support in that. Thank you. Thank you.
Has to have there for a minute.
Okay, let me close this up. Couple of comments and then we really do thank the panelists. That round of applause was well worth it. Thank you very much. They provide us their time, their talent, and we really do thank them for this. We also thank the many, many, many uncompensated volunteers who spend their time, their talent, their treasury, that are committed to informing and encouraging citizens to impact the quality of life favorably. Some of you are here, our organization is loaded. So please understand, these folks are doing this not for any money, nobody gets paid anything, doing it because they're committed to the greater Estero area. You should appreciate that. You, as they said, probably many, 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 many times, you also have the power to make it happen. Your participation in creating solutions absolutely essential. It isn't going to happen by Lee County commissioners doing something, and even, quite frankly, the village of Estero or Bonita Springs or any of them. They have their issues and they have their frame of reference and their focus. And unfortunately, it's not what we've been talking about in the last 2 hours. So I have to say, it does bring to bear, beg the question, what you're going to do about this. Get engaged. Our job is to provide the information, try to make you informed. That's what this is about. And encourage engagement so that you can, in fact, have an impact on the greater Estero area. It's something that's absolutely important. Last thing I would say, it's tied to what Gary Bogue said. Not only does FGCU and Water School do this, but there are so many other organizations that are involved in the environment. Look at them, check them out. If you see something about them that you really like, give them a few bucks. It'll help. He was absolutely correct. It's private dollars that helps us move forward. So please think about that. And I'll wrap up with a comment or a saying that we've adopted in the soon-to-be official Engage Estero. Be informed, get engaged, and make an impact. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.